Ngā mihi mai o ha kia koutou katoa, kia tau mai ki tēnei wāhanga, te pāhotanga mataora ko Auaha Live. Ko Sandra Julian a hau ko ngā timutunga, ngā te tama, pautama me te atiawa o ku iwi no Taranaki. Kia ora and welcome along to another episode of Auaha Live. If you are joining us here today, would love to know what questions you have. So in the comments below where you're watching this video, drop us any questions. We can see them as they come through and we'll be able to answer them as we go or when we get to the end. So here on Auaha Live, if you are just joining in for the first time, this is a show where I interview the talented people that make up the business events industry here in Aotearoa. The industry has many dedicated people who fall into the industry and we never seem to leave. So my guest today has taken his love of entertainment and events and has carving out his path as New Zealand's authority on event insurance. So today I'd like to introduce you to Stu Hartley. He's the underwriting manager of Event Cover. Stu, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Sandra.
Yeah. Nice to have a chat today.
I
thought we could start, if you want to just introduce yourself and give everyone a bit of background on what it is that you do, who you serve, and maybe how you got to this point in your career.
Okay. It's probably a good point actually to start where I came from. So ordinarily not an insurance professional. Prior to insurance, I was in a totally different trade. So as you can probably tell by my accent, I'm not a native of New Zealand. I came here back in 2011. I'm originally from Manchester in the UK. I took a path into acting. I actually trained as an actor when I was younger, and then I stepped over the other side of the camera and trained as a cameraman. Went to university to study film and television, and was working as a cameraman in the industry back in the UK. And then, like most people do in the events industry, kind of fell out of love a little bit. And like everybody in the insurance industry fell into insurance. Obviously, it's not something that I ever perceived or wanted to get into. And just really fell into an industry and really started to kind of thrive in that industry, but wanted to kind of bring in obviously my personal love of entertainment. That's what I kind of grew up kind of involved in. So when I came to New Zealand back in 2011, it was just post the Christchurch earthquake. There was a lot of requirements for people within insurance experience to kind of get back into the industry. And I really came here to kind of firstly make a new start, try and get back into film and television in some way, but then kind of got dragged back into insurance again. So really for the last, 9 years, have been kind of bringing that personal love of entertainment, events, and as you said, kind of forging that career and forging that path to create a real niche. 2018, we established Event Cover, and that was just simply because I just really had enough of the kind of corporate rat race, and I felt the need to really set up a dedicated specialist here in New Zealand to supply the events industry across as a whole with access to dedicated specialist levels of cover, and that's really where I am today.
Wow. So there has been that little flip-flop between in the industry, back to insurance, in the industry, back to insurance.
Exactly. I mean, I absolutely love what I do. The reason why I love what I do is because I'm serving an industry which is fantastic. We've got to the stage now where we don't necessarily see ourselves as an insurance company, or I certainly don't see myself as an insurance professional. We purely feel that we are now embedded in the events industry, and we're a supplier to the industry. So that's taken some time to kind of carve out, to obviously get that acceptance from our peers. But gradually we are finding our feet.
And because you're doing the underwriting of the insurance policies,
Yes.
Are the insurance companies becoming more aware of what the needs of the event industry are? I mean, and I ask that question because, 15 years ago when I started out in this industry, well, it was probably longer than that, but I took over the business on my own 15 years ago. And so I started looking at all of these areas, and event insurance you had to go offshore to get any kind of event insurance. There just wasn't a lot of options available. And when I spoke to like our insurance broker, they go, well, you could do liability cover. But I'm like, no, what about if, it's cancelled for any reason? Oh, we don't really do that. So are you finding that the insurance companies are becoming more aware of the needs of the event industry?
No.
No.
No, it's and that's the whole reason why we set up Event Cover. So prior to being so we underwrite the risk. We act on behalf of Lloyd's of London. We are New Zealand's only dedicated Lloyd's cover holder. And whilst we do have to go overseas, the book stops with us. We underwrite on behalf of, because we're embedded. And the reason why we set up Event Cover was because 2 years ago, when I was working for a large multinational insurance broker, it was such a niche. I was the only person within that company who really had any clue whatsoever about this industry. And there are not many insurance brokers in New Zealand who would put their hand up and say, hey, I understand, firstly, the industry, and secondly, the insurance for that industry, cancellation insurance, abandonment, non-appearance, and so forth. So I was carving out a niche, becoming specialist in that field. And that was the entire reason why we set up Event Cover, because the industry as a whole was not being served the way I felt it could be served. There was no one on the ground here in New Zealand who really had the foggiest regarding this industry. And the industry is so varied. We're talking here on the business side, but outside of that, film, music, festivals, sports. New Zealand, over certainly the last 10 years that I've been here, or almost 10 years, sorry, has changed dramatically in respect of, firstly, the types of events that are here, the size of those events, and therefore the risk of those events.
Yeah.
The larger the event, the more money, the more revenue generated, the more costs. And that's your risk. That's your risk as a PCO, as an event manager, as a promoter. If that event is cancelled, like we've just seen with over the last couple of months, you're in the bad stuff, really. And that's the risk. That's the risk. And it's our ability to understand what that risk is, and also understand the industry, which I think sets us out above the general insurers out there who just don't play in this space.
Yeah. And so globally, so you're saying Lloyd's is the insurance company that you go to underwrite the policies. Are there just not many globally that you've got a choice of going to? Yes.
There are. COVID has changed everything for everybody. And what I mean by that from an insurance perspective is the losses that the global events industry suffered has been phenomenal. We're talking the billions. And what that means is when, as you can appreciate, when insurers lose money, they go out of business. Yeah. And what we've seen, certainly in Lloyd's, is that some underwriters have suffered significant losses, huge claims, that they've gone out of business effectively overnight. Some of the syndicates that we work with and work with very closely have gone.
Wow.
because of the losses they've suffered. Now we're talking the Olympics, we're talking Football World Cup, we're talking large-scale music festivals, we're talking some of the biggest conferences, exhibitions, congress, seminars, just stopping overnight and continuing to be cancelled. Those claims will be huge. And what it means now is there is less capacity in the market. There are less, there are less underwriters and insurance companies now available. So having us on the ground here is even more key, because the risk has now become greater. The risk hasn't changed; they've just been kind of added to. So that's our kind of benefit of being here on the ground, that we've still got that access into Lloyd's, but we kind of understand what we're all going through. We're in a unique position where we're actually able to continue a little bit. But how that may change. That may change.
Yeah. So, I mean, people, general public, may understand how, a sports festival, an outside event, has its risk, because if the weather is really terrible, then it can't go ahead. Yep. I mean, we saw that particularly down here, homegrown, I think it was a couple of years in Wellington. It was terribly windy. It was raining. It was really horrid weather. And they had to postpone. So they postponed for a day. But you can understand events like that you really want to have some insurance around. What if we can't go ahead? What if we have to give tickets back? What if we have to refund? But what if we then move into like business events, which the general public don't really understand what we do very much. So how does insurance change between those outdoor events or those sporting events which have cancellation factors attached to them versus our expos and conferences, which are indoors, which are, the things that I've seen in my time is something erupts and you can't fly because the skies aren't safe. That affects your attendance numbers, but it might not stop your event from going ahead. So how are people assessing their business event risk?
We refer to business events as vanilla risks, and I say that in the best possible way. I say that because we don't have the adverse weather exposure as we do with outdoor events. We have less of a trigger for cancellation. A sporting event, for example, could get cancelled because there is, rain on the wicket. There is waterlogged football pitch. The inability for spectators to actually get to the stadium, for example. When it comes to indoor business events, people perceive that there is less of a risk, when in fact, it's the same risks. We could have an adverse weather event which just stops people getting there. We have that in the south. We could have, as you mentioned, the inability for a large number of participants to be able to attend, and that can be through many, many reasons. Flooding. We saw the terrorist attack, which terrorism was never really on the agenda for us. We kind of sat down here, bottom of the world, and we never really discussed it. We, in fact, were actually giving it away as a complimentary level of cover. And most organizers were actually come back to me and said, "Hey, Stu, how much does it cost to remove that? Can we get it a little bit cheaper? Because, there's no risk of terrorism." That changed overnight. Communicable disease is the one we've gone through now with the pandemic and COVID. And again, prior to COVID, it was never discussed. It was never taken out. It was never purchased. For an indoor event, we're talking along the lines of, fire, facility failure, an interruption to that venue. That means that we just can't hold the event. The big one was the Sky City, the International Convention Center. We had a lot of events booked into that venue, and then overnight we had the fire, and they kind of have to reschedule and postpone and move and so forth. So risks are still there. More than anybody what those risks are and what could possibly cause a cancellation. Every risk is different. The cost to insure those risks will increase and decrease based on time of year, where in the country it's taking place. You know, we have an earthquake risk in Wellington compared to an earthquake risk in Auckland, for example. So that's a factor that we look at as well. The types of events, the types of speakers that could be attending those events. Is an event dependent on a speaker? Like a music event, for example, the event may have to be cancelled because that speaker just can't attend for whatever reason that may be. So there's many, many different types of risks that we look at. We've now started saying that, you know, risk is just omnipresent. It's everywhere, and it's just being added to constantly. Pandemic is now added to that. So that's the conversation we're now having, which unfortunately is just not available. We just can't insure for COVID because we're still kind of going through it. But all the other types of risks which were there prior to COVID haven't changed. They haven't gone away. They are still there.
Yeah, I definitely know when we were assessing our events and what we wanted to insure against, or what do we need to insure against. So when we were doing our risk management plan, it was, what's our mitigating factor and what can we put in place to mitigate that risk at all, and then what can we insure against. And I know we've had conversations around the whole terrorism insurance. Like, do I need terrorism insurance? I'm like, our clients got a pretty safe subject. They're not doing anything controversial. We're not doing anything that's polarizing. So do we really need terrorism insurance? So I know that we were thinking along those lines before Christchurch happened. And now it's like, gosh, we just don't know what we don't know. And yeah, should that be on our list of things to insure against now? So it's where do you stop? You know, where do you draw the line between what you do insure against and what you don't insure against, given that, you know, business event budgets, they aren't huge. So we're always conscious about where we're putting our money. So where do we draw that line, Stu? It's like...
That's the whole conversation. I mean, people drew the line prior to COVID and said, hey, you know, we don't need to cover war. We don't need to cover terrorism. We don't need to cover communicable disease. The amount of times that conversation took place or didn't, and people events weren't insured for pandemic. And in hindsight, we can say, oh, but if we just knew it was available, or if we knew what the cost was, or if we even perceived that as being a risk, we would have taken it out. Hand on heart, they wouldn't have done, because as we all know, there's a very, very no injuries there, Hope.
No.
There's a very fine line in respect of, you know, what is affordable. You know, we're all working to a budget, and most of the time that budget doesn't include insurance. Most of the time, the conversation around insurance has never taken place, and we appreciate that. And that's how I certainly feel that's my role to make sure that those conversations are now taking place. They're certainly taking place now after COVID. Everybody's scared, and we appreciate that. Everybody's now worried about what else could cancel the event. So it's a lot of hard conversations regarding those lines. There are still probably high 80% of events in New Zealand which aren't insured at all.
Wow.
That's a rough guess, but I'd be pretty confident around that.
Yeah. Do you see the tipping point? Do you see when is it that events come to you? So I imagine, you know, the 50-person event that's not a high ticket price, if they do need to cancel it, there might not be a significant loss to the organisation. They probably think insurance is not for me. So do you see that tipping point? Where is the point where organisations start to have that conversation with you?
It is really dependent. I mean, that 50-person event being cancelled could be a loss felt as great as a 15,000 person congress over a large number of days. It just depends who the organizer is, who the client is. You know, could you afford to spend $500 covering a $50,000 kind of budget? Sometimes $500 is just not there. And that's how cheap insurance can be. You know, our minimum premiums will start around $400 or $500. Sometimes that decision is weighed up. You know, we just don't have that $500. So we'll try and offer some lesser levels of cover, or we'll work with an insurance broker if they're there, or if the insurance broker's involved, you know, to see if we can certainly do something. How can we make sure that there is some levels of cover? But again, it really depends what the risk is, what the perceived risk is. You know, what do you want to do if the event's cancelled? Do you want to be able to postpone? Do you want to be able to reschedule? What a lot of people don't realize is that the insurance actually allows you to do that. So we will pay for any additional costs. So where most people believe that, okay, we're insuring $1 million and that's the revenue, and that insures all the costs and so forth as well. What happens if we have to reschedule to another venue 2 months later? We will cover all those costs, because most of the time those additional costs will be less than the actual loss would have been if we'd have lost the whole event. So we will effectively pay mitigating costs in order to reschedule. Homegrown, for example, you said was rescheduled to a day later. So, you know, we work with those guys, and the insurance would have paid for the extra $50,000 to move it to the day after. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, how the insurance can be used to actually make sure the event goes ahead rather than being cancelled. The last thing that anybody wants is a cancellation. If you can move an event, if you can postpone it a little while, if you can reschedule it, that's what the insurance is there for also. So again, it's a little bit of misunderstanding, not being aware of the availability, costs, who to go to, who to speak to. That's what we're here for. We're really to kind of get out in front of people.
So the postponement, is that part of the cancellation policy, or do you have to take a postponement insurance and then a cancellation insurance, or is it all part and parcel?
99% of the time, the insurance policy will be cancellation, abandonment, postponement, rescheduling, curtailment. I've missed anything? Yeah, all those. Elton John, for example, that's the big one that's going through the paper at the moment regarding, you know, the ability or the inability to refund tickets. And that could be any event. Now, that event was curtailed. It started and didn't finish. And if there was a loss there, then the insurance policy would have paid out. So again, it's making sure that people understand what can and can't be insured, and what are the costs, what are the risks, and then kind of weighing those up. At least if the conversation is taking place, that's all we can do. If the PCO has made the call to actually look at insurance, that is a great step. That's a great start. If we then can present the benefits of that insurance, and then obviously you guys can speak to your client around the benefits of that insurance, then at least that conversation has taken place, rather than it just not taking place at all.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the conversations that our clients least expect from us. Although they expect us to be aware of the risk, it's not a conversation. It's always a conversation that I start. Like, it's always a conversation, right? Let's now talk about what happens if this goes sideways. What happens if this goes sideways? What happens when that doesn't happen? So that's always a conversation that we start. And then
people don't want to talk about it going wrong.
No.
And the best thing we can do is give those examples of when it did, because then people can kind of learn from that and say, oh, well, when that happened, did that pay out? Did the insurance react? You know, we also offer an insurance product here in New Zealand for weddings, and that's the worst conversation to have. Why would a bride and groom want to even consider or contemplate it not happening? So that's even harder sell than just standard event insurance, because you are painting the picture of what happens when it goes wrong. Most people don't even want to enter into that conversation, but when you're dealing with millions of dollars in respect to a client putting on an event, I feel that the conversation has to take place. You know, what happens if? Who knows? You know, everything's unpredictable at the moment.
Yeah. And so is there anything that we can't insure against?
COVID at the moment is the big one. Anything directly or indirectly linked to the pandemic is currently uninsurable.
Right.
The usual, war is uninsurable. But again, you can buy that back in again. So there are most policies. So an insurance policy will cover you for all risks. And what that means is unless it's excluded, it's insured. So that's everything. Everything's insured, and then you exclude certain items. So that's how an insurance policy works, rather than you're insured for this, 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 and this. It's basically everything's covered, and then we kind of strip it back a little bit. When we exclude certain items, you can actually purchase those for extra. So communicable disease, again, was the big one. It was excluded, but it was always available as a buyback. Certain risks carry more threat. So Wellington, Christchurch, they will carry the earthquake risks and so forth. Certain events will be frowned upon. Again, the content of that event may not be of interest to me, for example. Certain people are uninsurable. Certain speakers may be uninsurable, and that may be because a really bad claims history, a real bad history of not attending, or pre-existing medical conditions, for example. So each risk is different. Everybody in the events industry, knows that every event kind of differs from the next. There are many factors to take into consideration. So it is a very, very specialist type of insurance, but it's an insurance covering our industry, and we all love this industry. So I like to regard it as the sexier side of insurance, because it's what we do. You know, it's what we're all involved in this industry for, because we love it, and therefore we know it better than anybody else, because we live and breathe it. And there are ways just to transfer those risks, and that's kind of what we're here for.
Yeah. Talk me through the speaker insurance. Like, when I first heard of that one, I'm like, wow, that's fascinating. And we got talking about it because we were bringing out a speaker from the United States who was charging us a hefty penny to be here, on top of travel and accommodation. So I think we did take out speaker insurance for that particular speaker, but I'd never heard of it before up until that point. So do you want to just talk a bit about what it is, and when a business event might want to consider speaker insurance?
Okay, it's just another peril. It's just another risk to be aware of. If you have a business event which is totally relying on that one person and totally dependent on that one person being there, what would be the outcome if they couldn't attend? What would be the outcome of the non-appearance of that person? A really good example in the business meeting space is, we bring over the likes of Barack Obama. Barack Obama's over here on his world tour. We're filling out a stadium. We have significant amount of money being spent on this event, and then Barack Obama can't attend because he's sick, he's injured, or there's a travel delay, which means he's unable to be here. So we're effectively underwriting him as the risk. So and again, that will be the same for a band, a music artist. Again, we'll just use the recent one. Elton John is effectively uninsurable because of his history. That will become worse as he gets older, and he's obviously got some ailments and some medical conditions. But yeah, he's effectively known as uninsurable, and there are many others like that as well, because of just either pre-existing medical conditions, or they could be excluded, or his previous history of just not wanting to get out of bed in the morning, which has happened. But from a business sense, we could have key guest speakers, and people will be attending that event purely to listen to that person or hear them speak. And what does that mean for your event if they just can't attend? It may be the ability to pay additional costs to bring somebody else in of the same caliber. Whilst that may not appease everybody, it may mean that you still have an event to put on. So again, each event is different, and yeah, the non-appearance is quite a key one. But again, it really depends on the type of event. Is that event totally 100% relying on that person being there? If they are, then that is your biggest risk, and that's what really should be insured.
Right. Okay. Lots to think about between speakers and cancellation and terrorism and pandemic and all of the things that go into it. But it's good to know that we have insurance options that, I want to say it was harder to access even 10 years ago. It was really harder to access. There was I remember an Australian company coming into the New Zealand market offering insurance. But even conversations around that and the pricing was it's phenomenal. So, I mean, from my perspective and where I sit in the scheme of the business events industry, I've definitely noticed a shift into the accessibility and more the affordability of an event insurance as well.
That's key. That's key. A lot of people are put off by the fact that they just believe that there is a very, very high cost. And when I refer back to when I said it's a vanilla risk because it's often cheaper as well. So as a risk itself, it's a less riskier type of event. Yeah. However, our one and only claim from COVID was from a business event.
Wow.
And I know of 2 other events in New Zealand which were cancelled in the business side as well, which were insured. That's not to say that there were others, but business events are perceived as the lesser type of risk because you're kind of removing that adverse weather aspect. So it's often cheaper. You're getting more bang for your buck effectively. Our specific offering to the business space and business events as a whole has all the bells and whistles. So there's so many additional add-ons which are actually included at a very affordable price. Every risk is different, so every risk will kind of pay a different premium. But when you actually weigh it up, the cost of insuring $1 million event could be less than $5,000. But again, it kind of boils back to what we discussed earlier. Is there $5,000 extra in the budget to insure that? And those are what are weighed up by obviously yourself and the client in respect of, can we afford to take on that risk? I think now post-COVID, people are starting to have those conversations. Can we just afford not to? And those are the conversations we're having at the moment.
Yeah. And is there is your premium assessed on the cost of the event? So if I'm putting on like a conference and my total budget for this conference is $250,000, then is my insurance premium based on the total overall cost of that event, or is it just based on maybe the venue hire of the event?
So yes, it is. It's totally dependent on the limit that we're insuring. So for example, and also what your net loss is. So we insure net loss. Right. And the net loss could be that you're just looking to cover your costs and expenses. Or the net loss could be that you're also looking to insure your net profit. So you're looking to insure your gross revenue. And if your gross revenue is $500,000, then we're insuring $500,000. which would then differ than if you were just insuring $400,000 costs. So every risk will differ based on the different points we spoke about earlier, and every event will cost a different premium based on the limit that we're looking to insure.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point that you bring up, because we just usually would go, well, need to cut my losses, but you're saying that we can insure for the projected profit from that event.
Yeah. So yes, so you insure your gross revenue, and your gross revenue is obviously derived of costs and expenses plus net profit equals your gross revenue. And again, it really depends of where you want to be. The insurance is there wholly to put you back in the same position as you would have been had the event not been cancelled. So what's your net loss? Well, as a PCO, you want to earn some money. That's the whole point of what you do. You want to put on a fantastic event and you want to be paid for it. And a client may want to earn revenue in respect of that themselves.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you want to be able to retain that net profit that you would have had, plus also maybe the ability to refund the cost of the ticket. Yeah. You can't retain that net profit if you're having to refund.
Yeah. Right.
The insurance allows you to do that because it's covering your gross revenue, and your gross revenue is probably derived from sponsorship, ticket sales, and a few other channels as well. So that is the pure essence of what cancellation insurance does. It's looking to put you back in the same position as you would have been had the event not been cancelled.
Yeah. And are you looking for our cancellation policies as far as, if we've got sponsors, are you looking for what's in that sponsorship agreement and what's the cancellation policy in that sponsorship agreement? What's our cancellation policy for our registration fees for our delegates? Are you looking for that type of information from us?
Yeah, we get quite specific in respect to the information we need. We like to see, what are your T's and C's? What's your obligation if that event is cancelled? As we've seen through COVID, there's a lot of conversations taking place with suppliers and PCOs and event professionals and so forth. If there's a loss, you'll probably never go to the entire limit because there's a lot of savings which can be made. A lot of venues who said, hey, here's your deposit back. You don't have to pay for that and so forth. So it really depends what the actual net loss is. After a claim comes in, there's a forensic analysis done in respect of what the actual loss is, and then we come up with a figure, and that's effectively what the claim will be. You'll probably never ever see a total loss because there are mostly some savings to be had because the event's not gone on. But yes, we like to know exactly where the contractual obligations are, because that then kind of dictates what the level of cover is. What we're seeing now with these ticket refunds and so forth going through the press, it's really put an emphasis on, what are you looking to do? If the event is cancelled, what would you like to do? Are you just literally saying carte blanche, no refund? Or is that effectively suicide for the brand? Would you like to be able to provide brand comfort to your participants, to your people attending any type of event, and give them a refund? Because that's kind of what would be expected. And in the current environment, you need to provide comfort to anybody parting with their hard-earned cash. Yeah.
And I think that's a good point that you raise. It's like, it's not only about the financial components of why you would insure against something. It is what's the reputation to your brand or your organization that would also suffer if you decided not to refund, or if you decided not to hold your event, and it was affecting other people. That can really kill a business, probably more your brand reputation than your loss of dollars because something happened.
That's key. And I think in today's society where there's a lot of keyboard warriors and social media is quite key, brand reputation is everything. If there's an event which is cancelled and you don't get a refund, or there's some sticking issue, then that spreads like wildfire across social media, and effectively then your brand is ruined. So what are you looking to do? Are you looking to recoup lost profit? Are you looking to be able to have the ability to refund? Are you looking to save face? Are you looking to create that brand presence whereby, we can work with you in respect of mirroring what the T's and C's are in respect of the insurance. What we're finding now is that a lot of T's and C's mirror the insurance policy. Some event professionals actually just say, hey, our T's and C's are, and then there's a link to the insurance policy. If the insurance pays out, then we can give you a refund. If it doesn't, then we can't. And it's that, it's clear as day. Yeah. So yes, it can get quite complex. But at the end of the day, it's what do you feel the risk is, and what really are you looking to cover?
Yeah. Great. I mean, it's so nice to have a conversation about event insurance, and for it to be.
I don't hear that often.
But to be more publicly a conversation that we should be having. Like, we're insuring our houses and our cars. We should be insuring our events too. Event insurance is an opportunity, or it's a mitigating factor. You can cover your risk that you're assessing for your event. So to have a conversation around it being a conversation we should be having more openly with every event that we do, not just the big events, not just the sporting events, not just the outdoor events. We should actually be having this conversation every time we're having a risk management conversation about any event. What does that look like, and how can we put some cover in place for it? So
and we can be involved in those conversations. We're happy to have those conversations. We have those direct conversations. We can work with the insurance intermediary if they're there. We're heavily trying to push into the association space, so making sure that it's kind of top down. We feel that, as I said, there's a large proportion of events which are not insured, and we feel that every event deserves to be insured. Or, as I mentioned earlier, at least have the conversation, weigh up that risk. It may be that you feel there is no risk, and then fine. You take that risk on yourself. But as PCOs, I feel that it's another kind of service that you can offer. Access to specific exclusive insurance. We're able to make sure that we are bringing in the professionals in order to discuss this with you and provide access. And that's making you guys stand out as, being the authority in your field in respect of putting on that event. The last thing that anybody wants is a cancellation. That's just, that is the worst case scenario. So as long as we can have the conversation, then at least that's a start anyway.
Yeah. All right. I will let you go and enjoy the rest of your day. But before we do go, I always ask all my guests one question, and that is, what has been your aha moment in business?
Can I have two? I'll do one. I'll do a quick one. So our first risk that we did as event cover was a business event. It was the Master Plumbers Conference. And that was the moment when we have that kind of framed. That's our policy. That was our first one that we did. And we're very proud of that, because then that was the start. That was the start of our journey to become the authority in this space. So that was our aha moment, is that we've now made it. We're off. Fast forward 2 years, we've just managed to pick up the America's Cup. So that's the big one. That's the one that we're very, very excited to be. And I think that journey from the Master Plumbers Conference to the America's Cup has been a gradual one. Without that first one, we would have not got to where we are now. So that's kind of been the journey for us.
Nice aha moments. All right, Stu, thanks so much for joining me here today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and hopefully we can spread the word more and have this conversation more in the business event space. So excited that you are moving into the associations, because the education, I think, around event insurance in that space as well, because that's a big part of what we do and who our clients are as PCOs, is that association sector.
Yep.
So yeah, I think you've got a big job ahead of you, just educating business event professionals and those holding business events around, what you can possibly insure against. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining me here today. If you're watching the replay, Stu, it's been an absolute pleasure. Event insurance is a pretty dry subject, but it's unnecessary when we're getting into events and spending money and getting people to spend their hard-earned cash attending our event. So after the episode, we will drop all of Stu's contact details into the comments area. So if you want to reach out to Stu and just have a conversation around your event and insurance for your event, you'll have all of his contact details. Just like to remind you to share this episode with anyone who would find it valuable. There'll also be a replay available on LinkedIn if you prefer that platform. And I do hope that you will be back here to join me again in 2 weeks' time. And we will be chatting with another guest and another one of the many talented people who dedicate themselves to the business events industry here in Aotearoa. All right, it's a Friday afternoon. It's time to go wrap up for your day. Go enjoy your weekend and have an enjoyable one. Kia pai ora whakatā, mā te wā.